Okay, if we're online, welcome to Birmingham City Council's Cabinet meeting. Notice of recording, members are advised this meeting will be webcast live and subsequently broadcast via the Council's meeting YouTube site, and members of the press and public may record and take photographs where there are confidential or exempt items. I have apologies today from Councillors Ian Ward and Paulette Hamilton. And on the opposite side from Deborah Cadman, but Graham Betts is acting in her place. Are there any other apologies today?
Councillor Robert Alden's not here today, so it'll be myself and Councillor Marion Jenkins for the consent agenda.
Thank you. No other apologies? Okay. At this point, we've got declarations of interest. I'm just going to invite the City Solicitor to give us a reminder about this meeting. And also just on the rules of engagement for today. So, Mr. Tinder, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So, this meeting is facilitated by the Council's Resources and is also webcast. Members will know, so members are gently reminded not to make any statements that will be seen to promote any candidates as part of the election campaign. Thank you.
Thank you. And under declarations of,
Declaration of interest, do you want that now, or have I slightly jumped
away? I was coming to that, but you may go first.
I'm on the board of B Music Limited.
Lovely. I myself need to declare my partner works for Birmingham City Council. That's Cotton. Likewise. That's the Zapper.
Item 14, the adoption of the Selected Development Corridor Master Plan. One of the partners is the Samuel West Birmingham NHS Trust, where I serve as a non-executive director.
Lovely. Anybody else? No. Okay. The exempt information. Are there any exempt appendices? Anything you want to raise any questions on today? No. Okay. That makes my life easier. So let's go on then to the actual business of the meeting. So item 5 is draft financial plan, which is over to you, Councillor Chatfield.
Thank you, Deputy. So this is obviously the draft financial plan, both for the financial plan and going for full council in due course. So I won't, no doubt, go through the more detailed arguments at the full council for everyone looking forward to. I would just, for my part, say that we have built upon the improved financial management of the council to continue to deliver on our priorities. We've set a balanced, prudent, and ambitious budget that reflects the interests and views of our citizens. So effectively, this is the formal part of the what we're proposing is allocating resources in accordance with the priorities set out in the council plan, ensuring that the council sets a balanced budget, which is our legal responsibility, but also has long-term robust plans for the health and viability of the council, ensuring that capital investment plans are set at an affordable and sustainable level, protecting the council's reserves in line with our reserves policy for rainy day events, and not seeking to use them to meet ongoing pressures or where savings have not been achieved. Ensuring that there is strong governance, assurance and accountability for delivery of savings outcomes and savings proposals within the budget, and mitigate uncertainty in the near and medium term. And of course, we still do face significant uncertainty, partly due to the continuing fallout from the COVID pandemic, not least around key areas and sources of income that we've enjoyed in the past, such as car parking being an obvious one, but also uncertainty around our leisure services, let alone what COVID will yet bring in the future. We still can't say very absolute certainty that it's really worse than the pandemic. So I'm sure we all indeed totally are. The other point I'll just make is obviously as an authority of local government across the sector broadly, haven't had the benefit of long-term planning over the last few years. It's got continually rolled over each 1 year settlement. Perhaps in the last couple of years there are understandable reasons for that, given the situation the country's in, but my plea, and I've made the same plea every year for the last 5 years, I think, and obviously government doesn't have to take a great deal of interest in what I say. That plea has been sadly overlooked in that what government expects of us is to provide long-term certainty, and we can do what we can in terms of financial planning. We've come a long way in terms of developing a 5-year MTFP and working towards a 25-year capital strategy as well. But in the end, what the person really said is that government gave the certainty of long-term settlement for the government. Hopefully one that reflects the needs and aspirations of the our city.
Thank you. I think it's just worth acknowledging at this point the sheer amount of work that's gone in for members, but also particularly officers over the last few years to get our budget into the place it is today. It's a very different budget, of course, from those who might have seen in previous years. And that's testament to the sound financial management that has been brought in. So it's a thank you to everybody that's been part of that process. And to echo Councillor Chatfield's points on long-term funding, that was, of course, a core part of our levelling up pitch to government that we have made recently, and we look forward to working with them further. Right, comments or queries? Councillor Mackey, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you very much. I hear what's being said about this being debated in the budget, so I should imagine that this will be a shorter conversation than we'll be having later in the month. But some of the things there, you'd expect me not to let them go without comment. Obviously, I can see why the administration will want to put themselves forward as being sort of strong financial management. It is true that under Becky Hallard and Clive Heafy before, there were some officers there that certainly had found great financial skill and that are trying to do their best. But obviously, as you'd expect me to say, I would point out here that some of the political direction has not aided them. We have to remember that the auditors 3 times put warnings in at this council regarding their poor financial management. This is the only council in the country, I must remind you, that has had 3 auditors' letters for poor financial management. So that doesn't really sit well with the narrative that's trying to be pushed here. As we would see it, this is an unfinished plan that we're going to be told after the election how the books are going to balance. This isn't a balanced plan. And that sets alarm bells off for me, because obviously the spending commitments that are being made before the election, and we're going to be told after the election how we're going to be paid, and that they're going to be paid for. And I think that's incredibly concerning. A lot of the spending commitments as well, there's a big draw on reserves. So this is not something that's been built forward under the administration, that's been planned for and moved forward. This is just a dive on savings to pay for issues. And these issues have been here throughout the whole of the administration's period. This is not just something that's appeared now. They've been here for the whole of the time that this administration has been run, and then dive into reserves just before an election. I'll leave everyone else to realise what's been going on there. Any savings in this budget, over 50% of them are one-offs. So there again, it's a bit like family at home deciding that they're not going to go on holiday next year to save some money. But of course, that money has to be recouped again. These are not savings that will be seen ongoing, which again, I would say doesn't remind us massively of strong financial management. And the final point I would make is that 25% of the spending on this budget is the repayment of debt. And if you're repaying debt and taking things out of reserves, that doesn't really help, and it doesn't look like strong financial management to me. But at the end of the day, as I say, we'll have these conversations more in the end of the month when the budget becomes before council. But thank you very much, Bridget.
Thank you, Councillor Mackey. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. I'll be very brief because I will give a detailed commentary at the council meeting in a couple of weeks. I just want to pick up the cabinet member on this one point. This suggestion it's a balanced budget. It clearly balances in the sense of meeting the requirement to a balanced budget for the city council. Looks balanced, but is it balanced in terms of income and expenditure? In other words, can you tell us what is the extent of the draw on financial resilience reserves and so forth in this coming year? And actually, what is his view for the future where the financial plan sets out a gap of about £32 million a year? Does he believe that gap is going to be easy to bridge?
Thank you. And Councillor Jenkins.
Councillor Hunt has in fact picked up the point I was going to raise, which is that there seems to be a £33 million black hole in the budget, only to be populated post-May. And I think that will raise a lot of concerns amongst people. Although you mention certainty of funding from government, the council's spending power in the light of government contributions is up 7% this year and up 24% since 2016. So I don't know whether we can look to the government to explain any financial failings that may or may not be present in this plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chatfield.
Thank you. I'll go through as I can in the order which it came in. So, Councillor Mackey, I would say the position today is a long way away from those reports. It's been 2 years since those reports were published. It's been, we've moved on a long way, and I think that's as you rightly indicated, we've come a long way. We've been very well served with outstanding Section 151 officers got a long way in terms of bringing authority in the position it should be. And I don't think any of us have ever been have not recognised that we were in a very difficult place in financial terms. I think to say the first point, I think, in any improvement journey, to use jargon, is you have to recognise where things are going wrong. I think this administration did recognise where things are going wrong and have taken a number of actions, substantial actions, very difficult actions in some cases, to ensure that we moved on from that place, which I think was not a great place. But I would come back to the point Councillor Jenkins made. I would say that yes, there has been a couple of settlements where the government have given us, and what we describe as a perfectly reasonable, settlement. However, it in no way reflects the vast sums of money, upwards of 700 million, that were removed from the budget since 2010. And it also doesn't recognise the substantial increase in demand we've seen. We all know there's a national crisis on adult social care generally. We all know the pressures that we place on the authorities around things like children, especially homeschool transport, rising demand around children with special educational needs. All of these things pose deep and structural challenges for local government that central government simply hasn't recognised. There's been some additional funding, but it's never enough. So you get the headline that says we're putting X number of pounds in, but it's never enough to actually solve the problem in the face of such an increasing demand curve. I think Councillor Mackey alluded to the fact that the future spending, the spending commitments we've made are reflected in the forward year's budget. That isn't true. They are. There is 7.2 additional funding put in to meet our President's priorities, and that is reflected in the budget going forward. Arguably for every year going up to 2027, but it does, as planned going forward. In terms of debt payments, I don't think, I am, I suppose, what we describe as a deficit walk. I'd rather pay less interest on our debt. Quite frankly, I'd rather have less of a debt burden, I think, like any of us would. And I think we are, if you look through the budget in detail, you'll notice that there is plans to reduce our overall borrowing portfolio down by 4% over the next couple of years, then up to 6% as we go towards the end of the plan. And that is critical to my mind in showing that not only are we using our reserves, sensibly, maintaining our reserves position, protect us from a rainy day, but we are also reducing that debt burden, which means, and I'm sure as Conservative members should appreciate that the burden of payments to future generations will be reduced. And I think that puts us in a very different place to a lot of other local authorities, but also to where we have been in the past as well. I hope you'll acknowledge that. In terms of the reserves position, the use of reserves is limited to, we have a financial resilience reserve, which covers us off for, unexplained, difficult demand curve pressures, structural things that happen that sometimes you need reserves for, and it's right that we have that. Again, meeting those audit requirements that actually we put aside money to make sure we have reserves in place when things inevitably, when you're dealing with the challenges we are, when we hit obstacles. The other point about reserves is we will use them to apply savings in future years. So we will use them to make sure that, again, it covers off part of what Councillor Jenkins raised, that future years gap. Part of what we use those reserves to make sure that we are in a position to put things, building blocks in place to ensure we can close off those future years gaps, which are undoubtedly challenging. I would say it's been, as we move through this process, that future years gap is reduced for a lot of work that's been ongoing anyway. We have a very, very ambitious delivery plan. I don't think there's any doubt about that, and it is vital for the future financial stability of the organisation that we hit the objectives of those delivery plan. And there's a whole series of internal mechanisms, both chaired by Deputy Leader, myself engaged with as well through the snazzily named CDOT committee, that make sure, corporate delivery oversight group, that make sure that those delivery plans are in place, robustly challenged, monitored, to make sure they allow the impact that they're meant to do. And you'll see the effect of those already coming forward. But it's absolutely vital that we land those, make sure we land those successfully. So I think that's Councillor Mack's point. Councillor, I think I've answered a good question on the gap being challenging. As I say, I think what we need to be ever mindful of is that we can make our decisions as an organisation, but we need that stability of long-term view for government. We are trying to project into the future as best we can based on the information and knowledge we have at this point. And given the massive headwinds we face, not only in terms of COVID, but also in terms of demand pressures that are referenced, for every large local authority, this has been incredibly challenging and testing period. And to come out where we are in terms of being able to present this budget, I think is a testament to not only the office of leadership, which you rightly point out, but also I think the credibility and seriousness of this executive, quite frankly, which have collectively taken ownership of budget challenges in a way that I certainly haven't seen, previously. And I think over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a sea change in the way that the executive works hand in hand with senior officers of council to keep an iron grip on our financial position. And that's illustrated by not only what we've delivered today, but also in terms of our ability at closing that savings gap off, which again referenced in the audit report, bringing that savings gap down to a position where we are delivering the vast majority of our savings and payments. And I think again, that's a sea change for this organisation. We will not own opposition with that.
Thank you, Councillor Chatfield. Becky, how are you?
Thank you, Councillor Jones. So I just wanted to clear up the future years, the future years 13,335 million gap that we have not formally balanced just yet. The reason we haven't shown it's formally balanced, most local authorities would, is because we're shoring up our deliverability. So we're ensuring that there is a delivery plan behind every single saving that's in there, even for future years going forward into 23, 24, covering the 5-year period. This was raised by overviewing total scrutiny, as those of you there will remember. And the point was made that the July calendar, which is the first quarter update of the NTFP, I think we're one of the only authorities in the country that updates our NTFP quarterly. We will be bringing those delivery plans forward and so that we can solidly close off those future years. It's normal practice not to, and just to show it's closed, but we're not prepared to do that.
Thank you. I'll add just a couple of things to this. So firstly, the crisis of local government finance is generally one at a national level that has been recognised across the political spectrum by local politicians. And secondly, the priorities that we have our spending into reflect the public budget consultation engagement that we've done, as well as the statutory one with the business community. It's through listening to public priorities that we have decided to allocate our resources where we have this time. Final call for anything on financial budget. Not seeing.
Can I just make a quick clarification? I think I made a slightly more impression on the use of the financial resilience reserve. In this year, it's been used to cover off some of the financial pressures in terms of homeschool transport, for example. Future years, it is that whole financial savings. Just want to make that distinction. So it's not future years, it's this year.
Okay. Something else, I report spending another 5 hours on this at council.
That's why we let that go.
Right. We've got recommendations. 2.1 to 2.5 in front of us, with declarations of interest that have already been taken and noted. Are those recommendations agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Right, we move on to item 6 then, which is over to Councillor Francis, Museum Services Contract and Lease 22-26.
Thank you, Deputy Chair, actually, Mayor. Good morning, everybody. This report relates to the Museum Service Contract and Lease for 2022 to 2026. And the purpose is to agree to fee the management contract with Birmingham Museums Trust, the Museums and Heritage Services for the period just mentioned, at an initial investment of £2.90 million per annum. This includes 9 council-owned museum sites in the council's substantial museum collection. The report is also update Cabinet on the work of Birmingham Museums Trust over the previous contract period, 2018 to 22, and associated matters, and to outline plans for the forthcoming period. Birmingham City Council funding also supports the Museums Trust to develop its long-term planning in relation to the management of the council's museum collection, programming of activities in city museums, and in support of capital development proposals for heritage sites. Just by way of some background, BM2 was established as a company limited by guarantee, with charitable status by the City Council in 2012. The Council is the only member of the charity, which merged the in-house service with the then independent think tank trust. The initial services contract ran for 4 years and was renewed annually until in July 2018, Cabinet approved the renewal service contract for a 25-year period up till the 31st of August 2043, and new commensurate 25-year lease arrangements for the council and museum sites. So the latest contract period is outlined in Appendix 1. It would be fair to say, I think, that in common with most cultural organisations across the UK, the last 18 months have been particularly challenging due to the pandemic. BMT has managed to contend with the financial impact of the pandemic fairly well, mainly through a combination of continued revenue support from the City Council and other key stakeholders, notably the Arts Council, England's Cultural Recovery Fund. The Trust also benefited from government supply relief and staff furlough scheme, business rates reduction and charitable relief. But still, Birmingham Museums Trust had to make significant staff reductions and other economies to weather the storm. You will be aware, colleagues, that our museum offering in the city is of significant national and international standing. The emergent thinking to ensure the future service offerings follow the modern model to our city and its grand challenges will feature heavily in this next 4-year funding programme. This report demonstrates how this investment in our museum service is consistent with helping deliver our stated priorities in the City Council's plan, which includes creating opportunities for local people to develop skills and make the best of economic growth, inspiring our children and their youth to become ambitious and achieving their potential, preventing social isolation, loneliness, and encouraging active citizenship, and more. And finally, working with our diverse communities to ensure that we deliver a gainless Birmingham that connects our citizens and fosters civic pride. BMT have been advised that, subject to Cabinet approval, the proposed arrangements for the museum service contract fee on 2022-23 for another rolling 4-year period will be to remain at standstill whilst the annual inflation increase if it's awarded. Proposal is to set a contract fee 22-23 at 2.90 million, which is funded in the existing service budget. It's important to state that Birmingham Museums Trust is also funded by the Arts Council of England as a national portfolio organisation. ACE also awarded the National Museums Accreditation Scheme. The City Council's funding is a key consideration for Arts Council in regard to their continued investment in Birmingham's cultural infrastructure for the future. In conclusion, whilst BMT sites reopen for business, the ongoing impact of the pandemic on recovery and the continued viability of our museum services remains. Therefore, the continued financial commitment from Birmingham City Council outlined in this report will be absolutely vital in helping ensure our museums can recover and continue to attract funding from their partner organisation and other sources. I'd ask colleagues, therefore, to approve 2.1 and 2.4 in the cabinet. Thank you, Dr. Gordon.
Thank you, Councillor Francis. Comments or queries?
I just wanted to clarify one point which has been raised concerning projected funding for museums. I mean, I can imagine it's been an incredibly difficult period to try and run a museum over the last 2 years. Even though all that guidance, it turns out, probably wasn't necessary. But I think museums would like to be given 12 months' notice of the funding that they're going to receive. But I think at the moment we're only giving them 3 months. Is that right? And is it possible for us to give museums more advance notice of the funding they're going to receive?
Yeah, can I just make a plea for everyone to speak up, please? The consequence of being warm in here is we've got a really noisy heater behind us, so I'm starting to pick up everything in the room.
Sorry, I'll speak. Did you not catch what I said?
I just, yeah.
Oh, right.
You have a very deep voice.
Right. Is that good or bad?
Okay. I bring Robert Jones, if I may.
Yes.
Thanks, Councillor Francis. And certainly that's something we can look into. It is a 4-year rolling programme, and we'll give it 3 months notice at the moment, but certainly we can look at whether we can give more notice in the future. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? that case, we have a phosphorus recommendation 2124. Those approved. Thank you. It's back to Jane, the commissioning of cultural activities 22-23.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader. This report refers to the commissioning of cultural activities 2022-23. And the purpose of the report is to approve the recommended allocation of budgets to support arts and cultural activities in that period at cost of 2.976. In June 2019, Cabinet agreed that the sports yards budget, which was approved at the Council in February 2019, would be ring-fenced until 2022-23. Council took this decision to ensure a stable sports yards budget for a period of 4 years, to include the Commonwealth Games this year. This decision to confirm our support to the sector for a set period subsequently proved to be crucial, considering the unforeseen and devastating impacts that COVID-19 was to have on our cultural sector in Birmingham and elsewhere. The Council's revenue-funded organisations have so far, and I'd like to say, managed to contend with the impacts of the pandemic, mainly through a combination of continued revenue support from the Council and the wider public sector. This includes the Arts Council, again, England's Cultural Recovery Fund, the government staff furlough scheme, business rates and charge review. But again, many cultural organisations had to draw on their operational reserves, which has no doubt weakened slightly their financial security. While most arts and cultural organisations have since worked for business, the ongoing impact of the pandemic on the recovery and continued viability of cultural organisations remains. Therefore, the continued financial investment into the cultural sector from Birmingham City Council outlined in this report remains vital in helping these funded portfolio organisations to make sure they can recover and continue to attract funding from the partner organisations. The 9 Birmingham arts organisations in the Council's revenue funded portfolio are also funded by Arts Council England, and they are known as mostly recognised, known as NPOs for short. Arts Council currently supports a wide range of cultural organisations in Birmingham, investing approximately £33 million a year. The City Council's funding is an important consideration for ACE and their continuing investment. In early 2022, all NPOs will be required to submit their applications to Arts Council funding from 2023 to 2026 and to retain their NPO status. Their preparation of comprehensive information will assist the Council in reviewing its relevant funded arts organisation portfolio contributions to our Council's priorities. The Council will seek to ensure that from 2023 onwards, the contributions that funded organisations can make to the wider outcomes of the Council are updated, appropriately considered and reflected in budget needs. Over and above the annual revenue funding portfolio of arts organisations, smaller based arts organisations commissioned to deliver a range of projects which link to the outcomes in our Council priorities. These schemes are targeted at adults in neighbourhoods, cultural and doorstep, young people of the next generation, and residents from culturally diverse backgrounds. These initiatives are important as they enable the Council to target activities that people with less opportunities to engage with culture. The Local Culture Development Fund and recommended in this report enables support from local groups and community activators to work as part of local arts forums, helping coordinate and develop cultural activities on the ground, particularly, as I said, in areas of local cultural engagement. In addition, really importantly, the funding supports the delivery of the Heritage Week, the delivery of the annual Black History Month, and other planned cultural events. So I hope this colleagues will have the opportunity to read the report thoroughly. It's clearly demonstrates how this investment in our cultural sector is consistent in helping deliver our stated priorities in the City Council's plan. In conclusion, the investment in funding for the cultural sector will not only support the delivery of several of the aspirations and outcomes set in the Council's Be Bold, Be Birmingham legacy strategy for the Commonwealth Games, but the City Council's continued investment in our cultural sector is crucial to its survival, and therefore its ability to contribute to the delivery of the Council's priorities. On that basis, Deputy Leader, I ask the Cabinet notes and recommendations and approves 2.1 to 2.6 in the report. Thanks.
Thank you. It is a big year for culture and the arts in our city. Any comments? Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Yeah, looking at the allocations, there's no inflation increase for the organisations. They're all being paid at the same level, which is in real terms a 5% reduction. How do they feel about that?
I think we're working really hard to make sure that all our neighbourhoods can take part in that. I'm happy to bring obviously Councillor Simon Easton, who's joined the board and has worked more closely with people on the ground.
So we have to see on the line.
I don't think that it's on the call. No, never mind.
No? Okay. Let's say Councillor Matthews first.
Well, I can tell you I'm on the board of one of them. So, yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, I think that COVID was incredibly difficult for them, especially because they had to shut down, they couldn't operate. They did receive millions of pounds from the government grants, which means they're in the situation that they're in now. A standstill funding that we've got at the minute is better than cut, but I think they would prefer to see more money than they're receiving at the minute if they were to fulfil their charitable objectives that they would like to achieve. Wage inflation in the hospitality sector is huge since coming out of lockdowns and all these other areas. The entertainment sector, bars, etc., cafes, the whole of Birmingham has come out at the same time trying to employ people. A lot of those individuals, some people have stopped from doing it because they just were having stopped to do it. Some people decided to retire. Students are another popular source of staffing. Therefore, a lot of those haven't returned to university yet, so they can't get that staffing, and just the wage inflation and supply and demand that comes from that. The staffing certainly levels, people are being amazingly stretched. For some evenings, myself and the other board members, we were asked to come in and do a shift, and then we offered to full pints, and we were told that that wasn't required, but we came in and took part in the briefings, stayed for a show, and then took part in the briefing at the end because they were just that short staff. I've had meetings during the day, and I've noticed that cafes and that have been closed during the day because they can't get staff, but they're concentrating them all for the evening. Now, these are valuable sources of funding that they use to try and support themselves so they're not overly reliant on the council grant. And of course, if the council grant is staying the same, which is a real level cut, and then this is just pressures that they don't want to receive. And we've all seen energy prices are rising massively at the moment through the uncertainty in Ukraine. Hopefully they will come down, but I suspect that won't be anytime soon. And they have other uncertainties, car parking. In the evening, a lot of their people who come to watch these plays, etc., they rely heavily on car parking. Some of the car parks are being removed. There's charges being placed on regarding the clean air zone. And these are just, they're uncertainties. Business doesn't like uncertainty. They like certainty that they can plan and move on about. And so it's a tough time for the sector. I just would say that, they've had they had a lot of grant money. Even the smaller businesses were able to pick up 20 and 30,000 pounds of grant money. Now is the dangerous time really for them coming out of this area. People don't really know the dropout rate. There's a lot of shows were sold out. They've now been rescheduled just afterwards. You notice that a lot of full concerts that were fully sold out, there are spaces now. Sometimes these are people who can't make a rescheduled date but decide not to go for the new, rather than going for a refund, have decided to be supportive, or just decided not to go because they still felt concerned. So the dropout rate is something that we don't really know how big that is yet, as to how many people are just not happy to return. So I think it's a very tough time for these industries, and I think they would prefer to have seen an increase in line with inflation. Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you. What do you want to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And clearly it has been a really difficult time for all of this industry. And although grants have been forthcoming and the further obviously have been implemented in together with the supplier and the going forward, clearly we want to support these organisations, and we have been working on the Office of Concern, has been working in detail with the organisations to see what we can do to ensure that continued funding. And of course, our funding from Birmingham City Council is very much a contribution, and there's a significant contribution from the Arts Council of England to the organisations too. And then that funding is predicated on our contribution to the organisation. We will, of course, continue to work with the organisation, and any that are experiencing extreme difficulties, we will see what we can do to help.
Thank you. I agree with, thank you, Bob. Councillor Mackay, I agree with much of what you said. I'm well aware as to what's happened in Birmingham. And of course, what goes on in Birmingham is reflecting nationally. It's a huge problem. I think certainly the period before Christmas wasn't helped by the stop-start and the change of the instruction plan A and plan B. It made it very, very difficult for our arts organisations to plan, particularly as far as live performance is concerned on stage. And I know last night, for example, I'm on the board of directors at Birmingham Rec. We had a very long discussion at that meeting about audiences, and they've done some very good marketing analysis of recent productions and how their particular audiences are attracted to particular types of shows. But however, it's been problematic for them sometimes because of the staffing issue that you mentioned earlier. And if shows have had to close very suddenly, that means a layoff of all staff. It has a knock-on effect of bars, restaurants, and travel and the rest of it. So there continues to be much need for continued support of this sector. Very, very important part of our economy, very important for our tourism officer, very important for given that we've got the Commonwealth Games. And with that in mind, I have set up recently with senior officers some one-to-one discussions with the chief exec and finance manager of each of those key NPOs to facilitate good planning and to give those organisations that the that the City Council is working alongside them in partnership as well as our trust institutions.
And Councillor Francis. Right. If there's no more comments, we have the vote to pass recommendations 2.1 to 2.6. Are those agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay. Councillor Francis show. We next have admission arrangements and published admissions numbers. Community voluntary controlled schools and local authority coordinating scheme 23 to 24.
Thank you very much, Section Leader. This goes to the other side of my portfolio. And the report is with regard to the admission arrangements and published admission numbers for community and voluntary controlled schools and the local authority coordinated scheme 2023-2024. All admissions authorities within the report, of which Birmingham City Council is one, are required to set or determine admission arrangements annually by the 28th of February. Council is also required to determine a coordinated admission scheme, and both apply to the next football academic year. The proposed changes to the coordinated admission scheme 2023-24 focus on updating the timetable for the primary and secondary normal admission rounds for 23-24, which did not require a consultation process. Changes were proposed to the admission arrangements in respect to the published admission numbers of 8 schools, which did require consultation. Following consultation feedback from the schools concerned, proposals now for the published admission numbers of 5 schools to be changed, and these schools are listed and can be found in the report at section 3.7. I recommend therefore that Cabinet approves the admission arrangements, including community and voluntary job schemes schools for 2023-24 are set out at 2.11 in the report, and the scheme for coordinated admissions 23-24 at 2.1, 2.2. Thank you, Dr. Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Francis. Any comments or queries?
Yes, John.
It's just a comment more than a question. I just reflect on the fact that if you look at what we've spent on consultants and taxis since September 2018, it's 5.8 million. I understand you could build a new special needs school for the same amount. And I wonder whether that's best use of the 5.8 million on consultants as opposed to actually having a new school. Just a thought.
Only wasn't capital investment. Apart from that, great.
That's Adams.
Thank you. I noticed that the primary school on the edge of my ward, quite close to my ward, is getting halved in size. Are you absolutely sure there is this reduction in demand that's happened? It's quite a significant reduction taking out a whole form within the nest of primary schools in that area. Absolutely sure that the schools in the area will be able to cope with taking out so many places.
Would you like me to bring them through to
Yep, we have somebody on the line.
Yep.
Right, officer, I can't see you soon. Do we have an officer on the line who could say?
Thank you.
Good morning. I've got Jaswinder, who's probably best placed to answer that query, if that's okay, Deputy Leader.
Yes, please. Jazz, over to you.
Thank you, Jazz.
Morning. Yes, it is. If you look at the surplus places paper, and due to falling birth rate and the situation that is compounded by the fall in net migration, the primary sector has there are surplus places in the primary schools. We've been working with schools quite closely. So the decision, when a school's made a decision to reduce their PAN, and as a council colleague has said, and which reduces their intake by half, neither the school nor the local authority officers have taken that decision lightly. If this position should change, it's quite easy for us to follow the process to introduce additional capacity in the school, because we are not at the moment reducing the school size. So we're not taking classrooms out of commission or reducing the size of the school physically. It's just to allow the school a fair chance of organising their resources so that they can manage their budget according to the numbers that are coming in.
Okay, so answer the question.
Thank you. Yes, in part.
Okay, I'm sure Jazz will be available for any follow-up queries specific to the board. Okay, anything else on this one? No. Thank you to Sue and to Jazz down the line. If there's nothing else then, go back to my agenda. We've got in front of us recommendations 2.1 to 2.1.2. Are those agreed? Yeah, lovely. Okay, item 9 is the adoption of Birmingham Green Syllabus for Religious Education 2022. Councillor Cotton.
Thank you. I'll give Councillor Francis a rest. Thank you, John. It's a really important moment for education in our city, because the important draft syllabus that's come to Cabinet today is the culmination of several years of hard work by Birmingham's Green Syllabus conference. That conference was convened back in 2017 to undertake a statutory review of the syllabus. It's been superbly chaired by Guy Gordon MBE, who I'd like to extend my thanks to for his leadership throughout. And also, I'd like to extend thanks to all the conference members for the seriousness and dedication that they've shown in approaching the task of reviewing the syllabus and their commitment to the children and young people of the city. I also add a word of thanks to the officers from education and from legal services and the team who've been supporting this work throughout. They've done a tremendous job. The syllabus that's before you today is the result of some impressive collaborative working between representatives of a broad range of Birmingham's religious and non-religious groups, as well as teachers, councillors of all parties and others. I think it is something that this city can be really proud of. The report provides information about the 2022 syllabus and the way that learning will continue to take place through the 24 dispositions. It also sets out the legal implications that the conference considered, and in particular the principle that equal respect must be accorded to different religious convictions and also to non-religious beliefs arising from the Fox judgment back in 2015.
So what we've got here is a syllabus that reflects the strength of interpaid working here in Birmingham and the incredible diversity of the city as it is in 2022. As we said, it's home to people of many different faiths, many different perspectives and beliefs. So I'm looking forward to this syllabus being taken forward in our schools, and I'd like to recommend its cover today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I do not underestimate how much work has gone into getting to this point. So a huge thank you to everybody involved in that. Councillor Francis, shall we bring you in?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much to Councillor Cox for doing the bulk of the work here. It's taken a long time to produce a syllabus that's going to be part of the other schools, and you know all key groups, key religious organisations that have been involved. As Councillor Cox says, if the Cabinet approves the syllabus today, we will choose to start the new academic year 2022, which is really useful. So again, huge thanks. Working so hard with our partners in the schools to get this finished. Schools will be very grateful to learn with the in the new academic year. It's something that many of us have other initiatives in schools as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackey.
Yeah, I just want to echo, it was quite nice when we can have an agreement, John, and I just want to echo the words that you gave there for the hard work in this area by Guy Horton, MBE. He's been tireless throughout the whole time that I've been on the council, just quietly gone about his work, making sure that he's delivered in a quiet way without really looking for any publicity, which so I thought it was a good opportunity that we can give him some now. So wonderful. Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. I'm going to be positive too. I was on SAPRE for 10 years, I think. I got a long service award and was marginally involved when they set out about 15, 16 years ago to revolutionise RE in the city and to change the approach, which is what you see reflected here in the updated curriculum. And I think what was done in Birmingham has been really underplayed and underappreciated nationally, partly because we've had several conflicts between faith and education in the city, which have been quite high profile in recent years, which has tended to undermine the really, really good work that's gone on in working with the diversity of faiths and now pleasingly also the diversity of non-beliefs in the city within the curriculum. Because what this curriculum does, it talks about values that people derive from their faith, and it talks about experience, as opposed to being a mere tick box training exercise in the rituals of religion. Recognising that students come from many different backgrounds and that seeks to help them to build their personal values from their faith. It's very different to what is taught around much of the country. I remember SAPRE really struggling to establish it and struggling to be heard in terms of what was being done in Birmingham. And as I say, unfortunately, in many ways it's been overshadowed by big controversies in recent years, whereas actually there's some really, really good practice going on in the city which should be recognised.
Thank you. We have some statements.
Thank you. And thank you to both councillors Mackey and Almond for those exclusive comments, particularly around the contribution that Guy has made as chair of the Green Syllabus Conference. Thank you also, John, for your long service to SAPRE as well. I think your point is absolutely the right one. Birmingham is very much leading the way when it comes to interfaith working and also in the leadership around religious education. We've got some of the city to be really proud of, and that we can share with other local authorities as well as an exemplar of how to do this and do this well in a great diversity like ours.
I echo that. We are a unique city with a unique curriculum that really speaks to the strengths of our city. So just a huge thank you from me to everybody involved in getting us to this point. It's a tremendous undertaking, really important piece of work. Right, any other comments? No? Okay, so that's item 9. We've got in front of us recommendation 2.1. Is that agreed? Thank you. Okay, item 10 is housing revenue account business plan 22 to 23. Councillor Hussain.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Right, okay, a lot's been happening, so I'm next slightly a little bit excited. Okay, I'm sure you've all read the report as well, so this is just to brief colleagues the key points and priorities that we've set out in developing the housing revenue business account. This is, like I said, an exciting development and offers as an alternative approach to manage the housing revenue account. We're hoping to deliver high quality service. This is the business plan updated on the council's portfolios and priorities investment in homes and services that meet our customers across the city. This is the first HRA business plan, and it demonstrates a way that we move forward, more of a proactive and forward way of thinking to invest in our homes in the future. Birmingham City Council have made a decision to focus, which we have prioritised investment in our stock. Due to the published report of the Glenville on the social white housing here, we have demanded changes which we look forward to in looking after our properties. The council have actually begun a substantial amount of programme work to meet the fire standards, which have been significantly achieved and which has directed homes safer for our tenants. To date, Birmingham City Council have received no direct financial support from the central government. Funding has come directly from the HRA. As an example, the total cost of our sprinklers programme alone, which has cost us 81.1 million, we've also spent more than 85 million on renovation and refurbishing our stock, and we're currently working through our reinvestment programme, replacing kitchens and bathrooms. We are also in the process of preparing a stock condition survey so we can target relevant areas of investment over the coming years. Our stock is one of the key priorities, as we know it's one of the key areas which have meaningful impacts to our communities. There's a set of priorities that you've all probably read, but I'll just quickly run down. Continue to deliver the safety programme, do a review on the stock condition service, recommission, repairs, maintenance contract, improve the way we engage with our tenants, deliver the housing retrofit programme, develop initial ways in which we increase the supply of affordable homes, the partnerships. Rent services, as you know, the government allows us to have a policy which allows us to increase the annual rent of CPI plus 2%. The proposed rent increases at 3.1 increase, which is based on CPI alone. We've decided not to put the +1 because we've realised furloughs ended, the 20-pound universal credits ended, the cost of living has already gone up, so we've decided to go with the 1% to make it easier on our tenants. Temporary accommodation rent has been kept at the same level as 21-22. The previous strategy was to reduce the rents over 21-22 and then again 22-23. We understand that this is a future business plan which we are considering and how we respond to these changes, whilst we have made a brave decision to expand our current position in relation to the HRA and how we use it. Whilst the future housing revenue account plan will be more comprehensive and more robust document, we believe that the document will be transparent about our priorities in the future. City Housing Director are focusing on levelling up. We want to begin with how we invest in the development, and the housing revenue account is a big step forward and moves towards our goal to become a more service that anticipates that is coming to the horizon and the structure of how we will respond. We intend to plan to build this on our strengths, target our resources and focus on some of the key issues that impact our community on a daily basis. I'm not going to carry on saying more, but that's the gist of it. I'll take questions.
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. Right, comments or questions? Okay.
Yeah, I've got a number of comments and do have a question at the end. I know the report acknowledges the poor state of our housing stock, and I think that probably should be a concern for everyone in the council. I can remember I was involved with it in the mid-90s. I think the John Major government created a way that local housing associations could build an awful lot of new housing stock, and so a lot of the housing stock that was owned by Birmingham City Council was replaced. Perry Bar, Castle Vale, Stockland, a lot of other sites there. You can still see those new then council properties or social homes are there, and they're still standing up very well. They are surrounded by properties of the same era that are still there now today, and they are starting to show their wear and tear. And I think that probably is a requirement that I think everyone could agree upon across party, that a lot of our older stock could do with being replaced. I think we see too many stories in the papers of families in different levels of distress. I think the report acknowledges the maintenance tender contract does need to go out for new tender, probably re-engineering from scratch, really. And that's my sort of plea at the end of this, that whilst that's being looked at, could this whole area, especially around the maintenance contract, could scrutiny be involved in that at quite an early stage? So there could be some sort of cross-party work to make sure that any maintenance contract that's put forward in the future does deliver for the residents of our council properties, to make sure that they are served well, and we don't hear about families sort of waiting a long time for repairs to take place. And I think that scrutiny is what it's there for, and it could do a really good job on that. Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt, did you have your hand up?
No, I didn't.
I'm very crazy. Apologise. Councillor Hussain.
We're doing a stock review condition on our survey on all our properties, so therefore we'll be able to identify which ones are priorities, which ones maybe need to be demolished and rebuilt. So I am going to bring Julia because I know she's eager to say something.
Do you want to come in?
Thank you, Deputy Leader. So apologies for speaking from here. So thank you, Councillor Mack. Yes, completely appreciate the question you're posing about the condition of our stock. So this sets out our ambition for this next 12 months, but in 2023-24, we'll be informed with a very comprehensive housing revenue account strategic document that will set out our strategic way forward for the next 5 to 10 years on how we are going to invest in our stock. We are underpinning this by evidence base by doing a robust stock condition survey. We're doing asset appraisals this year as well, and also developing an asset management strategy. I've been working very closely with Paul Gibson, Strategic Director of Prosperity, about estate regeneration and estates and how we actually regenerate them in their entirety and bring the house of stock up to a decent standard. And this will also encapsulate all the work that we need to do around fire safety and also route to zero. So we'll have a very strategic view reform from 2023 about how we're going to tackle our long-term issues with our public houses.
Thank you. And of course, the programme scrutiny is one for the individual scrutiny committees to decide. I'm sure if you take that request to them, I'll be happy to.
Sure, I just thought if it came from you, it'd have so much more clarity.
The executive never attempts to interfere with scrutiny or to prejudice their work programme. So I will leave it to you to raise at the appropriate chair. Right, any more comments or queries? No, Councillor Hussain, anything to add?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we've got in front of us recommendations 2.1 to 2.4. Are those agreed? Okay. It now says 10-minute comfort break, but we are only 1 hour into a 3-hour meeting. So if you are amenable after a few hours, we'll half past before taking that. Does anyone violently object? Okay. Right, in that case, it's item 11 now, over to Councillor Chatfield for the report.
Yes, this is the standard quarterly financial monitoring report. Well, obviously reflects the changes since the last quarterly monitoring report, and it's also consistent with the reporting that goes into scrutiny on a monthly basis. So this report indicates the company in a position to have a £4.2 million corporate overspend. But this is much reduced from where we were and continues to be in the right direction. I am confident we will get to break even by year end. 86% of our savings have been delivered up to this point. And again, I'm confident that there's further progress to be made. Some, disappointingly, are identified as undeliverable, but they are limited numbers. So, but I am confident we continue to push that number further as we get towards the end of the year. And that marks significant progress from where we were at the halfway point. It also notes and requests permission for the use of 6.1 million in financial resilience reserves for transport. Members may recall that this issue was flagged previously and now has been quantified in terms of the scale of it, and this is the allocation of resources to meet that challenge. Because I think without rehashing, we all know there's significant challenges around that service and significant requirement for modernisation. And then there's a further 3.3 million to cover the costs of the decision to terminate the contract with Royal Birmingham Travel as well. Obviously, members again will be aware of the circumstances of that decision. disappointing it had to be made, because I think most people agreed it was the right decision to make, and the decision has costs. And this is delivering 3.3 million from financial resilience reserve to cover off those costs in the year. And then just a little bit on the COVID impact. So again, this outlines where the COVID impact is hit. But in broad terms, we've seen loss of income of 22.8 million in year, and then expenditure increase of 14.9 as well, just to illustrate the scale of the problem we are still facing around COVID. With that, we've got to you.
Thank you. Comments or queries? So, K, 1, 2, 3.
Thank you. It sort of overlaps with the budget report earlier in many ways. I just want to pick up some aspects which maybe don't overlap with the budget report, and that's our old friend the Clean Air Zone. It's always interesting that in this financial report we get the report back on what's happening with the Clean Air Zone, and points I've made frequently about problems with the implementation of it. And we've got some very stark figures in this report showing 470,000 penalty notices, i.e. fines issued. Of those fines, just over 52% have been paid, just over half. The fining system isn't working for a start. It's not meant to be a fining system, as I said repeatedly, it's meant to be a charging system. It's just so repeatedly saying, it's so customer unfriendly. The answers we got at the last council meeting as to what was being done about this were ambiguous as to whether the council recognises this is a serious problem or not with the Clean Air Zone, and whether there's any serious effort being made to make it more friendly to users. In other words, to have a clear line as to whether this is a charging system or a fining system. Because at the moment, half people pay fines and half pay charges, and there's a huge 10 times difference between the two amounts. Second question related to this is in the, I think it's in the capital programme, I was just trying to find it, is I see that about £5 million is spending on the Clean Air Zone, which is meant to go into the city centre paving project, has been held back and is not being spent. Does this suggest that that's not going to happen? Is there a review of the spending from the Clean Air Zone? Because again, I've thought and expressed a view for a while that I think the priorities for spending have been wrong. And there's been some indication from the cabinet member of a reshuffling of priorities. So does this indicate a reshuffling of priorities, or is it purely a technical delay in the spending of that money?
Okay, I'll take all the questions in back for answers. Councillor Mackie.
Thanks very much, Bridget. I think it's Tristan's lucky day because he doesn't just have me asking questions today. He's got Councillor Jenkins, so you've got both of us, and obviously Councillor Hunt as usual. But yeah, I mean, obviously you referred to the send overspend of 11.4 million, and obviously you referred there to the 3.3 million cancelling the contract from North Birmingham Travel. I think this is coming from the funding from the Financial Resilience Reserve. I sort of probably was hoping that that reserve would be used sort of for more upbeat kind of scenarios, but I can see why you used that. But the question I had from that was the earlier financial plan covers the 6.1 million, or I could see it, the 6.1 million of the overspend in there, but I couldn't see where the 3.3 million North Birmingham Travel. And so I just wondering where that is in there, or is it in another report that's come to council and that I've missed? 3.22, there's additional costs there that's referred to as contract settlement of 0.3 million to do with the grounds maintenance contract. I was just wondering what that was. You know, is that to do with the way that we've brought it back in-house? You know, it's just sort of piqued my interest. And the final point from me was that I noticed on 3.24 it talks about a £0.8 million shortfall in the income for the waste vehicle garage. You know, I've asked some questions around that before, and I noticed that I think the answer for that is because we bought vehicles that come with a warranty, and then all I was going to say was that when we were buying those vehicles, we would know they would come with a warranty, and so wouldn't we have factored that into the budget for the garage itself? That, you know, we can get in the budget. If they're going to come in, we're going to claim on their warranty, therefore they're not going to be given the work. If I've got that slightly wrong, I'm willing to be corrected. But thanks very much for that, Richard.
Thank you. And Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you. So I'd just like to raise the matters mentioned in section 3.54, and this is to do with quantifying risk. I mean, I can understand that it's difficult to quantify risk associated with COVID, and it's difficult to quantify the significant benefits associated with Brexit. But I think when it comes to parking income and the impact of the clean air zone on parking income, I don't see why you can't make an effort to quantify the risks associated with that, particularly as we're only concerning ourselves with the budget now through to the end of this year. So not a great deal is going to change over the last couple of months. And also, I'd like to mention the highways re-procurement. I can understand that some of the negotiations may be commercially sensitive, but given how much discussion and time has gone into this, I think we could, for financial monitoring purposes, be given some idea of what the numbers associated with the highways re-procurement are. And then finally, I'd like to reiterate a point that we touched on earlier, which is that although the savings programme says that you say that it's 86% on track, we've seen from the responses to written questions that only 46% of them have been delivered on a recurrent basis. In other words, a significant number of those savings are one-offs, and therefore we would expect to return to the status quo the following year. And that's a concern. And I know this was a mistake that was made in the past, which the previous finance director put right. But now we seem to be going back to, I think, our bad old ways of mixing up one-off savings with recurrent savings. So I'd be grateful for a comment on that as well, please, Chair.
Okay. There's a number of things there. So I'm going to go to Councillor Blackwood first, Councillor O'Shea, and then back to Councillor Chaplin.
Thank you, Dr. Leader. I think I've got 3 points to pick up. Councillor Hunt has been very consistent with raising concerns about the charging system that's been implemented by the Clean Air Zone, and I've consistently said it's a system that's been set up by government that is being adhered to by all the Clean Air Zone cities and towns up and down this country, and there's more Clean Air Zones coming down the road. We continue to have conversations with the Joint Air Quality Unit at DEFRA. Only last week I was able to go to that number of local authorities side, raising some concerns about the lack of national leadership on air quality matters and the development of requirements to local authorities without the right level of national leadership. So we'll continue to have those conversations. I think the Clean Air Zone, the number of fines we've had in ways that the system's taking longer to bed in, and people in the city and visitors the city are taking longer to get used to the system. It was always going to be a complex system. It was a pretty difficult policy area. We know that. We've always expressed that. We spent a lot of resource in marketing and engagement to ensure that as many people as possible are aware of it. We are a city of 1.1 million people. We are a city that attracts visitors from all over the country, so it's taking a bit longer than we expected. In terms of the CAS revenue, we are bringing a cabinet report forward to the early March cabinet meeting, which will look to allocate some of the CAS revenue funding in line with our policies and the legal requirement. There are still plans to spend resources as previously agreed at cabinet with respect to improving the walking and cycling facilities within the city centre, including the allocation of the time. In terms of the highways procurement that Councillor Jenkins touches upon, we had a recent cabinet report which looked at set a clear timetable and a time frame around working with our partners. This isn't lots of services being delivered by this PFI are really important to us. We're not the only player in this. The government's a big player. Urban Highways Limited are a big player. A number of other partners are also well. So we continue our conversations with all partners to keep them on board. We recently had officers invited to the investment committee at the Treasury to talk through our planned move forward. And I'm very confident in the very near future with some positive news, and we'll be able to go out and we've commenced our procurement, but we'll get the green light to move forward the new structures. We've always been open and transparent with members. There are some issues around confidentiality that we've got to respect. However, we have regularly organised all member briefings that have been very well attended by members across the chamber. More than happy to do that again and again and again to ensure every single member of this council is fully briefed, because they have every right to the information. It is confidential. Members will get information on this, because members have respected the confidentiality and things that members have been informed have not been need to want to say. So I absolutely am more than willing to do that again through you, Chair. That's an open offer to Councillor Jenkins and the colleagues too. Thank you, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Saffer. Councillor O'Shea.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of issues raised there. Firstly, I'll hold the £300,000 spending on settling a legal dispute with a former contractor. That's all it is. It's commercial settlement dispute. With regards to extractors from that, we could have received a call, but the risk of taking a call isn't not worth it. It's commercial on that one. The vehicle garage, we would hope to cover some of those costs by additional work, which is not materialised over the course of the year, which is why those costs are going to go.
Thank you. And back to you.
Thank you. I'll pick up the point about the use of financial resilience reserve and Councillor Matthew. I think the kind of the clues in the name, I suppose. It is there to provide a cushion for when, as I said, we face unprecedented challenges within the service areas, and it does reflect where we were in previous years, where we didn't have that cushion, and therefore we had to dip straight into general reserves to face such challenges. Hopefully recognise the maturity of that approach. But obviously that's time limited, and we all recognise that there is a need for substantial structural reform in particular parts of the work. And that's why it needs to come here, and then the delivery plan has to be delivered to ensure that service moves forward. In terms of savings, I'll cover off the cost around the quantity of risks, the risks around Councillor Jenkins raised first. I think Councillor Jenkins makes it is a matter of discussion, because he's right, it is a projection, although I wait with interest to see what the benefits of Brexit are. I'm struggling from my part of the world to see those. Maybe you're going to tell me before his hinterlands and maybe over the next hill, we're going to sit and when, 10 years' time will be extraordinarily wealthy and happy and everything will be wonderful. I very much suspect that is not the case. And I would say there are immediate Brexit risks we're seeing already in terms of cost of labour, for example, increasing. It's partly driven by inflation, but actually part of this is there's more demand, there is supply, and therefore inevitably any economic student will tell you the cost of that increases. And we're already seeing pressures, especially around things like HGV, which will impact us as an organisation one way or another. And also, I think perhaps if you go to have a chat with our friends in the car industry and discuss how they feel about their supply chain, that might be something to do as well. But anyway, in terms of quantifying those risks, some of them, I think it's worth having a further conversation about if I can. I'll get back to you on some of the details, especially around the clean air zoning impacts and parking income. So I think it's one of the ones where you could make an assessment, you and I can sit and make a judgment about that. But that would be just us, to be frank, guessing. So I think we need a little bit more. There may be some more work we don't sit behind those. But I hope Councillor Jenkins, we've had conversations at scrutiny committee about this, and the sort of the approach we're taking of trying to quantify in financial terms the risks the organisations take, I hope is one that's recognised as being good practice. I certainly know it's taken a lot of work organisationally and is quite challenging, but actually puts us in a better position in terms of assessing what our reserves position needs to be, because our reserves position not only needs to reflect the size of our organisation and our gross budget, it also needs to reflect the risks and challenges we're facing. I think that's sensible. And rather than just pulling a figure out of thin air, having a framework by which to assess that, I hope is the right approach. Even if we can have a conversation if we want to about some of the detail around any of those items there. I think Councillor is a good one. And then one-off savings, I'll bring Becky in a second if I can, the issue around savings. But I would say there's always a mix one-off and recurring savings, and actually the quantity of recurring savings has actually increased over the last couple of years. But I will bring in Becky on that if I can.
Becky, I agree on that.
Yes, you can, yes. So it's interesting that we've got the MTFP here and the quarter 3 report at the same time, so it does actually help you do a review between the two. So you'll see that in the MTFP on page 20, which is page 36 of the agenda, it shows you the previous savings delivery over the last 5 or 6 years. and you'll see how that's changed as it's gone forward. And we're suggesting by the end of this year, the quarter three position is suggesting 86%, will actually hit 91%. 86% is the highest that it's been since we recorded it with the earliest year being 16-17. However, the bit I wanted to point you to is the fact that during this year we've had 35.9 million of COVID-related spend. That's after we apply pressure, if you like, after we apply government, central government income to that. So we've had to mitigate that as well as deliver savings that we've done this year. So as goes how well the organisation is responding to delivering savings, this is even after we've taken account of 35.9 million of additional spend that we didn't expect to spend, which is really
Okay.
Can I just come back, because I think you might have raised it. I
thought you were finished with that.
Apologies, the 3.3 million, it is, as yet, because this is a relatively new development, it is, when it's up to, we're being asked today to approve up to 3.3 million. Quantum isn't entirely certain yet. Once that is established, that will obviously be reflected in the medium-term plans going forward.
It's a little bit too early.
I'll pick. I thought Councillor Jenkins might do, but I'll pick. You know where I spoke in the chamber on Brexit, but I will answer your question to give you two results, the positives of Brexit. One of them is the rollout of the vaccination programme. I think if we had been hanging around waiting for the central delivery of vaccine coming out of Brussels, I think it would have been much delayed. I don't think anyone's arguing with that. And your other comments about employment, people picking up jobs, I think that I much prefer to see an expanded economy where people are being employed. And I think that is something that everyone in this room would agree with and applaud. Thanks very much.
Your earlier comments about the drastic labour shortage in our city to do hospitality. Right, any other comments on this actual?
I could go all day. I could go all day on Brexit, but I don't know.
I'm not doing any more comments on this. So, in the absence of any, we have in front of us recommendations 2.1 to 2.11. Are those agreed? Thank you. Right, I'll take one more report and then go to the break, if that's okay, at 1:30. So, item 12 is Kerry Bar 2040, a vision for legacy adoption of master plan. Councillor, same back to you.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. I'm really delighted that I've got the opportunity to present this report to Cabinet. The master plan for Kerry Bar is bold, ambitious, and has a widespread support from partners and stakeholders. It will enable us to capitalize at least the existing 700 million plus investment in Kerry Bar and deliver lasting legacy for the games which will benefit local people and the city as a whole. Kerry Bar is already benefiting from new homes, 968 currently on site, a new bus station, bus interchange, introduction of the sprint bus, and of course the fantastic enhancements of the stadium ahead of the games. Also, I've just been informed a further 99 more affordable homes are being made available for first-time buyers at Kerry Bar residential scheme, followed by a successful bid of funding by Birmingham City Council for a new government-backed scheme delivered by Fund England. A total of 5.7 million will be awarded to the city after a successful bid to join the first early funds delivery programme. The master plan, a legacy, will include high-quality homes to meet much-needed demand from the city, enhance our green space and support the lifestyle choices, renewal of the town centre, introduction of a more diverse use, which will support the local economy, a sustainable feature of the Alexander Stadium. The legacy will also reflect and contribute to our Route to Zero objectives, which will be in line with the City of Nature. Some of the most exciting set out in the master plan will include the reuse of bus garage to create a mixed-use space, offering culture for community and commercial uses. The renewal and updating of the review of updating of housing development proposals at the former BCU site, working in conjunction with owners of the occupiers of the one stop, putting the river core back to heart of Kerry Bar, opening and creating a green loop. The master plan, of course, has been involved and been consulted, and by consultation, the master plan team had events in person, allowing COVID restrictions and online. Whilst drawing together existing activities, the master plan is also a catalyst for what happens next. It will inform the basis of the Perivar 2040 programme. The master plan is supported by a wide range of planning policy. It doesn't attempt to duplicate existing policy. It will work in future policymakers, including local plan review, ensuring our planning policy reflects our ambition for Perivar. By setting out our vision, the master plan acts as a strategic outline which will support us for funders. Those funders have worked closely with our master plan development. We have already paid dividends, and I'm really pleased to say that the result of our vision and approach set out in the master plan and Perivar residential scheme has been selected as one of the pilot schemes for the government First Home programme. This will offer us additional affordable homes for the scheme. And just point of note is, I just want everybody to know that it's already been circulated, but on page 43, the master plan is to be replaced by one of which is a picture which reflects the site, which is intended to show Perry Hall Park. The adopted version, it will therefore include the new image, which has already been circulated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. I think you might have expected me to want to speak on this item. As this covers a chunk of my ward, this master plan. There's much to be welcome in this master plan. There is one significant new idea in it, which is the conversion of the old bus garage, very large bus garage, although possibly not as large as the urban legend says, it being the largest building of its kind, but it's made very, very large. And with real opportunities to create a really interesting community space at the centre of the new urban centre in Perivar. So that in particular is very, very welcome. My complaints about this are mainly about what it doesn't do, or where it's unclear about what it's going to do in the future. The second complaint I have is that it doesn't acknowledge in the text, it doesn't acknowledge the extent to which it has taken ideas from the neighbourhood plan, which was developed by the community over a number of years and adopted in the referendum, last October. And a lot of the ideas from the neighbourhood plan have been adopted into this master plan in terms of use of green space and linking green space. So I think that was disappointing, and it's not comfortable the way we see this jostling for position around Perivar as council leaders, the local council are doing stuff. It's really, really uncomfortable and not right. So my final question is this: how is it going to be taken forward? Because at the moment, this is quite a top-down exercise. We were consulted, lots of people were consulted. We had input, all been done. The consultation document is interesting, but going forward, is it going to be a joint exercise with the local community and the council leadership, or is it going to be continued to be imposed by the council leadership? Are we going to have a programme board which involves local councillors, not just from my ward, but Aston Ward, Birchfield Ward are in this, or are we going to be fobbed off to some kind of consultative forum, which is what I'm hearing, in the future? And I wouldn't be happy with that. I wouldn't be happy with that. But in particular, I think there's a number of areas in this master plan that need clarification. There's a number of areas that will need a bit of determination to see them through, and a bit of determination to make sure they're monitored closely, particularly around some of the impact of the redesign of Perivar on pedestrian safety. And you have to read the National Federation of the Blind's comments in the consultation to see what they say about pedestrian safety in Perivar and their confidence in how that's going. And the final thing is quite interesting relationship to the next report on the City of Nature, because there's a very interesting chart in that around what was the phrase? Was it green equality? Around how green each ward is in effect. And surprisingly, because Perivar has two large parks and a number of smaller parks as well, surprisingly, Perivar ward ranks quite lowly in terms of greenness. On the scale of A to E, it's in the Ds, not the E's, which is the one next door focused on in the Ds, not in the A's, B's and C's, which is surprising. So when you talk about enhancing green spaces, it's not just about making more of the green spaces we have, but asking those questions about why, it's ranking so low in that next report.
Thank you. Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you. I think that as far as the master plan for the area and Birmingham generally is concerned, you're looking to develop 35% affordable homes. Now, whether one thinks that's a good idea or not, it's interesting to note that the Athletes Village, that's the Athletes Village that's never had any athletes and never will, is only going to have 25% affordable homes. Now, I think that's because we paid far too much for the site. But I would be interested in your comments as to why it's only viable with 25% social housing, and to what extent, if any, we are projecting a profit on this development, because now it is no more than a speculative property development. It's nothing to do with the gains anymore. So why is that the case? And then that kind of feeds into my second point, which is that I'm not terribly impressed by the risk assessment on this. Now, I mean, it's difficult to find any word other than pathetic, really, for the risk assessment. There's only two risks referred. One's not adopting the plan, and the other's not implementing the plan. Neither of which are actually risks, really, are they? The decisions that we can take. So in light of my earlier comments, and generally, I think we need a much deeper and more detailed risk assessment attached to the whole thing.
Just a very quick point, just a shout out to the Birmingham City University students who are studying data and decision making, and they're watching this here today. I'd love to know what they are drawing from the data and decision making around the Paribar plan, but hopefully we'll find out at some point. But a shout out to them anyway. Richard, thank you very much.
I know there's a number of BCU graduates around the table as well, who I know will be glad to know what you're watching.
Shout out to
And that's unique.
Right, answers. Let me start with Councillor Hussain.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Councillor, for your question. The neighbourhood plans did form part of the local development. Sorry, my voice seems to be going again. We haven't listed every relevant planning document, but we have stated in the master plan that we don't actually duplicate existing guidances. So a note to the planning forum is mentioned in the delivery plan. And your other question was about having a working group. We do have a working group for the East Birmingham. So I'm not sure if the lead, which is part of the leading document, and a few other representatives are coming within the area. So I'm not sure if we're going to probably do something along that line. I don't know if Julie wants to mention anything, but I've also got Rebecca as well who might want to say something.
Yeah.
I think.
Let me see who's screen. Becky, I'll bring you in on the screen.
Or Steve.
I think Paul's going to go first.
Yeah, is that okay? Brilliant. Paul, over to you.
Good morning, Deputy Leader. Good morning, councillors, and thank you for Councillor Hussain for introducing that item. Can you hear me okay? Fantastic. Look, those comments are really helpful. So, Councillor Hunt, to start with, thank you. I'm a believer that there's life after planning. There's certainly life after master planning. And some of those issues you've raised there, I think, we'll take into consideration when we're thinking about how we put the right project and programme management function around delivering on the vision set out in the master plan. So the work that Becky has ably led so far takes us to a certain point, but actually the real prize here is getting the right expertise, the multidisciplinary expertise around a table in a single team, which can then work with both local ward members, cabinet members and the local community to shape the rest of the master plan, because all this does really is says this is where we want to go, this is the overarching vision. So I think in terms of your specific question about engagement and delivery, We'd love to work with you and neighbourhood planning team and others in the execution of the master plan. I think that's a given, and it's one of the things in my first few weeks as joining the council I've been given some thoughts to, is how we go about delivering on these big meaty schemes. Councillor Jenkins, I think I'm with you on the risk assessment, but it's worth pointing out, I think the risk assessment in the paper is just really the risk assessment in terms of the contents of the paper. It's not the risk assessment for the project, the programme as a whole. And as we assemble that multidisciplinary team around Perry Bar to deliver on the aspirations of the master plan, there'll be an inordinate amount of risk reporting, looking at the commercial, regulatory and other interfaces there that are required to come together to deliver. I'm afraid I'm not up to speed enough at this stage to give you any really comment on the affordable housing. What I will say is I've been having some good conversations in my early few weeks with my peers around the CLT table, colleagues across the council, colleagues across the RP sector and at Homes England, about what we put in place to substantially increase the delivery of affordable housing across the city as a whole in a number of different ways. We'll come back and talk to you as a cabinet about our strategy to do that at a later date. So Becky, you might want to come in on some of the specifics as well from
Yeah, Becky.
Yeah. Thank you. Hopefully it'll be all right. I'm struggling with a little bit of feedback, but hopefully, councillors, you can all hear me all right. To reiterate a couple of Paul's points, really, obviously, working with the local members and with local community groups is going to be essential here in taking this forward. And it's absolutely vital that the community is represented, local businesses are represented, and we mentioned the opportunity for creating a community panel. For example, we've already worked with a group of young people who are going to form themselves into a young people's panel for Perry Bar. So that's very definitely a given in taking things forward. And to slightly elaborate on Paul's comments on the affordable housing, that was the matter of a previous report to Cabinet. But as Councillor Hussain mentioned, we've also announced this morning as defined through the National Planning Policy Framework, through the government's First Homes programme. So that's an additional 99 on top of the number 312, I believe it is, 11 or 12 secured through the planning consent. So actually, of the 968 units on site, that's over 400 of them are defined as affordable. So I think that's really positive. There are challenges, as Paul says, in delivering affordable housing. We as a council need to lead that. We need to demonstrate the 35% across the Perry Bar area. So the master plan will be part of the tools that enable us to do that.
Thank you. That was breaking up slightly towards the end there. Is there anything anybody wants repeating, or is that substantially being covered?
I think the one thing we didn't really cover was the risk associated with the financial projections on the Athletes Village. Are we going to make money on this project? That's the bit I don't think I've heard an answer to yet.
I mean, there's obviously been, I think I'm going to leave it. I mean, obviously at this stage, it's probably too early to say.
Yeah.
That's obviously based on sound financial modelling.
Yeah, let's revisit that one time.
Right.
Okay, so on this report, can I ask, are there any further questions? No? Not hearing any? Okay, right, so go back to the recommendations then. We've got in front of us recommendations 2.1 to 2.2 for those groups. Great, thank you. Right, we'll take a 5-minute comfort break, if that's okay, and come back into the rest of the agenda.
Both content.
Okay, with that one ahead. Right, we are back to Cabinet. We are on item 13, creating a city of nature for Birmingham, and it's over to Councillor O'Shea.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. The City of Nature plan is the culmination of work on the Future Parks Accelerator. It's how we will deliver within our Future Cities plan. This breaks out of the parks silo working and makes the provision and support of green and blue space an explicit cross-council concern with new arrangements of governance. Not only do we set a new 25-year plan for nature recovery across our city, we lay out a green map for the first 5 years, working on our most environmentally deprived wards in Birmingham. Initially, we'll work within 5 open space within Bortley Highgate ward. Then over the next 5 years, expand that into Bortley West, Neachels, Gravelly Hill, Hyde Hayes and Castle Vale, mixing deprived wards and creating a spine for the city along Ray and Tame Valleys. This vision will in time extend to all wards in the city and does not preclude other sources of funding becoming available elsewhere. Should note, Councillor Hunt, you asked about Perry Bar. Biodiversity net gain will become a requirement for developers, and they will be asked how we're going to make our area richer in terms of nature and the environment. They can spend money elsewhere, but also be building in a 30-year maintenance fund for capital work as well. It's also worth noting we have a second front on this, where we work from the outside of the city in. Many of our most important spaces for nature are on the edge of the city, and there's a government programme to prioritise these precious sites and put funding towards this. So we'll work from the outside in as we also work from the inside out. For the first time, we believe in the UK, we have created a map of environmental justice. It takes into account index of normal deprivation. It also reflects access to green space, life expectancy, and climate risks for all the wards in the city, including things like the urban heat island and so on. This provides a solid evidence base. Funded the seal levy of £500,000, with support from the annual revenue spend in these wards of around £1 million. We will carry out detailed engagement with the community in Borsley and Highgate. This is very much about doing things with rather than to the community, to help map out the direction in the remaining wards. I'd like to thank Amira Salter and Nick Grayson for their hard work on this, as well as the rest of the Parks team. Together, they have created a groundbreaking programme that's been recognised at a national level for innovation and quality. I can also confirm to Cabinet, as a result of this work, we've been invited to bid for a further tranche of FPA funding over £300,000 and a report going to the Cabinet system to accept that. I recommend this to Cabinet, and is there anything you want to add?
Thank you very much, Councillor Shea. But yeah, I'm Amira Salter, I'm the FPA Director. Just to add to Councillor Shea's comment, we are one of the first in the country to be looking at parks and green spaces in this way from an environmental justice perspective. And yeah, we're really, really excited to hopefully see this work. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a truly exciting bit of work for our city. Right, comments and queries, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. It is a very, very interesting piece of work, isn't it? I want to pick up what I referred to under the previous report and what I think Councillor O'Shea referred to. This environmental justice index is very interesting, and many of the results are quite surprising. When I said about my own ward, surprised me, and I think some of the other wards would be surprised to find themselves ranked D or orange. It's a colour coded, and obviously Perry Bar's orange, but it is actually quite a low ranking in the environmental justice index. If you're in the orange categories and the red category, of course, it's the lowest category, and that's the one you're focusing on in particular. And I fully understand that, but I wonder whether perhaps a piece of work could be done to roll out to ward members, in particular, into local communities, what lies behind the index, so that we can understand what these rankings are, and they can be used locally as well as on a citywide basis. That information seems to me there's a lot of ammunition in there. I'd like to know why my ward is ranked orange. Got some suspicions probably about volume of traffic as opposed to the actual quantity of green space, but I don't know. And some of the others might benefit from knowing as well. In terms of biodiversity, which Councillor O'Shea mentioned, I very much welcome the embedding of biodiversity in development. the 3Bs neighbourhood plan I referred to earlier actually requires all planning applicants to pay heed to biodiversity. So it takes it, it's trying to take it a step beyond what the city policy is because of some of the issues within that particular neighbourhood. And again, rolling out the information may stimulate communities to do their own pieces of work, particularly as I think the city is trying to pilot some more neighbourhood plans because they can really contribute to what the community does and what the community says about itself.
Thank you. If you're worried about Harry Bar Ward being orange, we're happy to change that for you in May. Councillor Mackie.
Well, I'm still going to make my offer to lend you my jacket because I can see you looking quite cold.
I've got my scarf blanket with me. That's very kind.
You're very welcome, Lord Beater. I'm sure Councillor Hunt may be looking to withdraw it after that last comment. But yeah, I think first of all, we welcome this report. I mean, who can't welcome a report that's looking to protect green spaces in your city? I think you sense there's some sort of caveat coming here, but yes, we welcome the report. I remember when this came to Code, and Councillor Hunt is not there, but his colleague Councillor Harmer is. And when we dug down into some of the detail and were asked some questions, because obviously we all had things to bring in from our own wards, some of the data that we were getting back didn't quite stack up. So welcome the report, like the aims of it. I think there was probably some clarifications in areas that would be interesting. You know, if you can see, we're just before an election, we're talking about 6 wards that are coming on to protect it. We probably would have liked to have seen this happen earlier, and obviously we're looking to protect and enhance green spaces across the city and have more of them. I think that pocket parks, etc., are ways that we could go forward that could have a greater sort of influence on the whole city. I think that the commitment here is for £500,000. That's about 40% of what Councillor Holt referred to as the CAS money that's going to build the fountain in the square. And I think that when you see those levels of money that are going into spending sort of physical concrete items in the city centre, and this is the amount of money that's been put towards the green spaces. You know, I'm lucky enough to live in I suppose you could class it as a semi-rural ward. Not much of that is actually owned by the council, thank you very much. That's obviously owned by other individuals. But I think we would just like to see more of what's being done here rather than just a smaller item. But thank you very much, Richard.
Chair, can I make a point of clarification? There's no CAS revenue money being used for the fountain in the square.
Thank you.
Well, can the area around it then, sorry, if you want to dance on the head of a pin.
Anybody else? Yeah.
I had the privilege of chairing the financial steering group that did some work around this. So I'd just like to thank the officers and partners who supported that group so ably. It was a very interesting group that studied everything from the microfinance to macrofinance and everything in between. It was a really interesting opportunity to be involved in. I'm really glad the City Council could support it and actually start to develop a conversation in the city about how we develop different financial modelling for development, for investment that recognises the importance of green infrastructure. Something that is really, really important.
Thank you. Councillor O'Shea, back to you.
I've been maybe on the issue about the measurements and statistics.
So just thank you for your question. We can, in terms of the actual map, it will really depend on which it really depends on which indices is kind of driving that particular ward. So some it might be more health and wellbeing indicators, for others it might be the fact that it's more flood risk. But we can absolutely look at that level of detail, and really happy to work with you, Councillor Hunt, on kind of how we make that a bit more available, that it really understands for residents, that would be helpful. So yeah, really happy to do that.
We did look at other potential options of mapping that. The wards appear to be the best level of working. You could do it down to lower super output areas, but it gets quite difficult that point to work with. The wards just seem to be the least worst option for mapping this. There are alternatives to these, but I'm not having it. Likely to recommend this to the cabinet.
Thank you. And it's worth noting, if you look at our future city plan, there is a substantial amount of green space we can be putting into the city centre as well, just to address the concerns there. Lovely, really exciting piece of work. We've got in front of us recommendations 2.1 to 2.4. Are those agreed? Thank you. Okay, up next, item 14, adoption of the Smethwick to Birmingham Corridor Framework Supplementary Planning Document and approval of the Grove Lane Master Plan. Your declaration of interest was noted earlier in this one, I believe. And if you go to Councillor Zappa to talk about this.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. The Smethwick to Birmingham Corridor Framework has been jointly prepared by Birmingham City Council and Sandwell Metropolitan Council as it covers a cross-border area. Sandwell intend to approve their document tomorrow at the Cabinet meeting. We carried out a consultation, a public consultation concurrently with Sandwell Council in October and November last year. The overarching goal of the framework is to promote joint regeneration. This is Westford, the renewal that is underway at Portland, Westford into Smethwick. To support that, we have the main public sector players in the corridor on board, including Homes England, the Combined Authority, Sandwell West Birmingham NHS Trust, and the Canals and River Trust. They're all signed up as delivery partners. Alongside the corridor framework, Cabinet is asked to approve the Grove Lane Master Plan. This is a more detailed master plan showing how the area immediately around the new Midland Metropolitan University Hospital could be redeveloped. Before I recommend this Cabinet, I just want to thank Becky Farr and a team of officers at the council who worked on this. Members on both sides of the line of control between Birmingham and Sandwell, particularly Councillor Sharon Thompson and Councillor Carl Rice, who've been instrumental in this piece of work. And the former Chief Executive of the NHS Trust, Toby Lewis, Project Director for the new hospital, Rachel Barlow, and Austin Bell, who initiated this piece of work with me some time ago. I just want to pay tribute to all those charities and organisations that were involved in this. I recommend this to Council Cabinet.
Thank you. Any comments or queries? Not seeing any. Very comprehensive. Thank you. We have in front of us recommendations 2.1 and 2.3. Are those agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, on to item 15, adoption of city housing transformation to enable reduction in temporary accommodation update. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader. I'm taking this report as read. I just want to highlight just some of the key facts that are in there. So we are asking for additional money to go towards the programme that we brought earlier on, which was around Oscar Gardens and the whole temporary accommodation and programme. For a number of reasons, we've had to do more extensive look at that in terms of the survey, and partly looking at the condition that the building was in compared to when we last gone in there. There's been some need for more updating in there, and plus there's been things such as theft of boilers and other things like that that have added to the expense that we've got to replace, and it's all for safety measures, so I'm sure you will all agree. Saying all of that, it's clear to say that this actual programme will still have a positive financial impact on us. It will continue to bring in significant savings over the next few years in terms of the council's budget, but also it will provide temporary accommodation for the larger families, which we always struggle to find decent temporary accommodation for. There's also one point that I want to also raise, Deputy Leader, and that's around the property acquisitions. I can never say it properly. It's just noting that in the report that we're asking for this to be recommending that properties are required by Birmingham City Council Department with the support of inclusive growth, where previously it was noted that we wanted to do that through InReach, and we've got a really strong business case around this. So finally, I just want to say thank you to the officers, not just who prepared this report, but have been working on temporary accommodation and homelessness for the last number of years, particularly our Director, Julie Brickett, Gary and Messenger, who have been instrumental in helping us to build the vision and move forward in a really preventative way, but also against what we're seeing coming through following on from the pandemic and also the rising cost of living that we're going to be seeing coming shortly. There is that concern that we're going to see more people coming through as homeless, and our figures are actually demonstrating that. So this is helping us to deal with that and help to support better accommodation for larger families. Happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Let's go, Councillor Hunt, Councillor Mackie, Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you. Just some broader issues around the project, which is, I think, quite innovative in terms of dealing with homelessness and was much needed to have a council around to get people out of temporary bed and breakfast. As you know, it's in my ward again. As I said, there's always in Perry Park. Oscar Gardens. When myself and Councillor Murray and Jan looked round, and it was very interesting to see around the sites, we asked that there could be some engagement with the local residents around that. There subsequently were several petitions put in opposing it from local residents. I'm not sure that engagement's ever happened. I think it would be really interesting and helpful, particularly as the neighbourhood around there is very deprived and neglected, the immediate neighbourhood. And there was that engagement with local residents around there to get them on board with the project.
Okay. So just in regards to that, Councillor, thank you very much for your questions and for your personal support in this particular programme. There has been misconceptions that have been put out into the also by your colleague, and that this is going to be, people that are on drugs and all kinds of stuff. It's added to the fear that happens in the local area. And it's been clear that this isn't exempt accommodation or anything else like that. This is family temporary accommodation. In every temporary accommodation centre that we've launched, that I've known of over the last couple of years, we have done the local engagement piece, but we've usually waited until there's something for them to actually look at, which means going inside, being able to have a walk around and ask questions of officers. It's almost a bit of an open day, so to speak, for local neighbourhoods. That will be planned once we've got those floors safely secured and making sure that they are where they need to be and all the things that are in there. So we will make sure that that takes place, and we'll make sure that those dates are timelined with yourself and your ward colleague so that you are both able to come along to that.
Thank you. Councillor
Mackie,
Cold's getting my brain.
Yeah, it's okay, no problem. I just was to say, obviously, there's 60 million here buying up 230 homes, as I understand it, and I just wanted a bit of reassurance. The shortage of family homes in the city, and we've seen the awful scenario of family homes being bought up by others and being converted into HMOs. So just like some sort of reassurance, really, that none of these family homes are going to be converted to HMOs and that they can actually be used for family homes for larger families as people intend them. I noticed that Oscar Gardens, the cost here is doubling from 2 million to 4.5, more than doubling. And we haven't actually started building anything yet. The council has a bit of a history of having cost overruns on its building projects. So just like some reassurance around that as well, that we're confident we're going to bring this in at some level of sort of reasonable spend. And the final bit was just ask for a legal opinion, if I could. The length of time that people are staying in temporary accommodation is impact on the license to occupy approach they are taking. Licenses are supposed to be for between 6 to 12 months, but there have been examples of people staying in temporary accommodation. I think Barry Jackson Tower has been given to me as an example of 2.5 years. And so the legal question I was asking was that could residents challenge the license length based on the length of time they are there, and therefore demand a tenant right to buy? And so, and if that is the case, would that then undermine the business case around this, is that we're buying a load of family homes here, people are in family homes for longer than the license is, and then they go there to say that actually they're a tenant, not really there under license, and therefore have the ability to claim a right to buy.
Well, Chair, my question follows on very closely from Councillor Matthews.
Should we take yours?
I think it might be wise. I just wanted to pick up on this point of licence versus tenancy. I think there's another risk there as well. That, and I'm sure the city solicitor will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the case where the court said that the famous quote, "You can call a three-pronged digging instrument a spade, but it remains a fork." Right? And the fact that you call something a license, it isn't a means of preventing it from being a tenancy. And if we're creating rights to occupy a property, irrespective of how long it is, if it was actually deemed to be a tenancy and not a license, then they would acquire all sorts of rights under tenancy legislation that you wouldn't acquire under a license. And it could result in us having, really quite large numbers of people with a claim starting to look like a bit like the equal pay, where we have ambulance chasing solicitors, encouraging people to make claims against Birmingham City Council on the grounds that they actually have a tenancy, not a license. And I'd just like to be reassured by the city solicitor that that is not a risk on this occasion.
Before I bring the city solicitor in, and just to respond to some of that, just to be clear, the reason why we are doing this is to reduce the need to use bed and breakfast, which are sometimes not even in the city boundaries of the units. This is a better option for the families who are in crisis at that point in time. And that is exactly why we're doing it. We're putting people first, and that's what it's about, families and children. It's not, it's not a tenancy. We still have the duty, the homelessness duty over those families. We have to be clear about what that is. We're not creating a tenancy for people. There's people in temporary accommodation, which is homelessness. And I take on board the points about people being there for longer standing periods of time. And if you look across the country, there's over 240,000 people that are currently homeless across this country. And part of that's to do with the appalling rate of social housing build that's been done across the council, across the country by the overall wider government. So until we sort out the national housing crisis, we will have to continue with these types of measures, which we will continue to do because actually we care about our people in Birmingham. So that's just on that point. The point about HMOs and family housing, we have to be clear. My colleague Shabana Hussain is doing an excellent job looking at the private rented sector with the housing colleagues and looking at exempt accommodation. We are clear as a Labour administration that we do not want to see the loss of more family housing because family housing is what is needed within this city. Unfortunately, the government won't change the policy and legislation around exempt accommodation, which is forcing or stopping our hands, stopping some of these family homes turning into HMOs. There is no desire through this programme, or I can probably speak for my colleagues on any programme on this in terms of homelessness, to be creating more HMOs. We have a homelessness issue that needs bigger family housing, and that is exactly what we are focused on. So I can give you assurances that this is not about creating more HMOs across the city. In fact, we're doing a lot of work to try and change the legislation, or at least convince the government to change the legislation so that that doesn't continue in this city. I think I shall leave there and hand over to legal to answer your legal question. I don't know if Julie wants to comment on anything else that I might not have answered properly.
I've got nothing to add to Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. So just to address your concerns, and I understand why you raised them, Councillor Jenkins. So as Councillor Thompson has explained, the provision of temporary accommodation does not translate into provision of a tenancy agreement. I can understand why you've asked the question, but I'm satisfied that that doesn't place the council at risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Comprehensive answers there. Anything else? I'm not seeing anybody. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. We have in front of us. I can make my way back to my agenda. There we go. We have in front of us recommendations 2.1 to 2.5. Are those agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Got my frozen fingers to actually turn the paper over.
The jacket is still there if you want to.
Very fine.
Yeah, it feels right.
We're on to item 16, which is back to Councillor Thompson for continuation of early help programme funding for 12 months. Originally called
Thank you very much. So this is just coming forward for a continuation of health funding. As you know, children's health services are a priority for us. In the city, we've got a huge number of young people and children, and I'm pleased to be working with Councillor Francis on some of the work around our young people in the city. But in terms of early help, the funding that was the funding that we've got for early help to date will end at the end of the financial year, and we're asking for continuation onto 2023. This money, it's a good sum of money, so it's 7 million, just over 7.5 million, and we feel that this is a worthy investment into our young people. This will help us to better link or continue the work on linking early help with our family hubs model, so that we've got a better integrated family service across the city, and that's for young people aged 0 to 19. And it will also help us to incorporate some of the work that we want to do around increased prevention, around issues that push children and families into crisis in the first place. And we want to achieve clear and measurable outcomes for the children and families of this city. So I'm sure that everybody will agree that this is worthwhile, that we invest this money. And I'd just like to again thank the officers that have been involved in this. And I'd like to personally thank Sue Harrison, who's only been with us for a short period of time, and also Andy Coldrick for their support that they've given me since I've been in this portfolio, but actually driving through and actually helping us to get a clear vision and actually make changes that we need to improve the outcomes for the children and young people across this city and their families. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? None. So, okay. So recommendations 2.1 to 2.3 are in front of us. Are those agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Item 17, Birmingham Carers Strategy 2018 plus consultation and recommissioning of Birmingham Carers Hub. Councillor Chatfield's down for this one, is that correct?
Thank you. It is. In Councillor Hamilton's absence, did agree to present this one today. So this report seeks approval to consult on the refresh and update of the Birmingham Carers Strategy in 2018 onwards, and to commence the consultation and co-design of the recommissioning of the Birmingham Carers Hub. This strategy provided a framework and pathway model for the recommissioning of carer services in Birmingham in 2019. It also included 6 commitments co-produced with carers and partners to the carers of Birmingham. I won't take it, I'll take it as read, and then obviously have to take any questions or ping them over to Graham.
Are there any questions? None. Lovely. Okay. Recommendations 2.1 to 2.4 are in front of us. Are those agreed? Agreed. Okay. Almost there. Plan procurement activities, March to May. Tristan.
Again, I won't say much. Obviously, this is the traditional. We've spent some money, we've bought some things, and as ever, I am more than shorter. I think it's actually one word. Get to May. What it is. What it is. Exactly. Happy to take any questions, although I am, of course, happy to sit here and read through the entirety of the report if you would so like me to do so.
Please don't. I'm really cold. Right. Questions?
One very quick one, if I may, recognising the temperature. I mean, it is a really poor facility to hold cabinet of Europe's largest metropolitan authority, I have to say. But we'll soon be finished. I'm just a little bit troubled by the item concerning the provision of a managed service provider. The sum concerned is private, but it's a substantial sum. I just had a kind of nasty feeling this looks a little bit like Son of Capita, and I'm concerned that our ability as a council to manage these kind of managed service third-party procurement arrangements has been very poor in the past. And can someone assure me, and I don't think you can do it today, but it may be a separate discussion, could someone assure me that this is a wise thing for us to do?
Colleagues in IT have assured me this is a wise thing to do, but if you want to sit down with Peter Bishop, I'm sure I'll be happy to walk you through it.
I think that's probably the best way to deal with it. There's going to be a lot of detail involved.
There is. Yeah.
Great. So that's no further comments made.
Okay. There's a private report that we need to consider as well. There were no questions raised on that earlier, so we won't go into private session. We have in front of us then recommendation 2.1. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Final one, emergency decision notice. This relates to a decision taken under emergency powers by the Chief Executive that we just need to note as a Cabinet. Can I pass over to you, Graham?
Thank you very much, Chair. As part of the government's approach to tackling the Omicron variant, we've made available funds to support the social care workforce, and these covered both care homes and home care in the community. The funding was announced in December, and it came through really late. It was only recently received, and it was intended by the government that be passed through the system to providers to fund initiatives to support the workforce, such as additional payments in line with government guidance. Because of the late notification and the need to pass the money to providers, the Chief Executive was requested to approve my report and recommendations, which he did in consultation with group leaders.
Thank you. So, any questions on that at all? Not seeing any, and it is simply for Cabinet to note that. So I'll take that as noted. Okay, that takes to any other urgent business. I'm not seeing any, in which case we'll close the meeting and go and warm up somewhere else. Outside, for example. Thank you so much, everybody.